I want to outline a little bit this journal article, and then say a little bit about how my thinking has evolved since that time. So in that journal article, I described meritocracy as a very baggy concept, a concept that was able to contain a number of components that were in and of themselves not necessarily bad things, right? They're possibly good things, but they didn't necessarily cohere very well. Some of them were even contradictory. But the great power of meritocracy was its pragmatic ability to contain these components. So the components were non-discrimination, opportunity, allocative efficiency, competitiveness, and reward. And in that article, I aligned these components with certain precepts of Singapore's developmental experience. I thought that these components aligned quite nicely with them. For example, the idea of multiracialism aligned with non-discrimination, the notion of personal responsibility, self-reliance, even rugged individualism seemed to align quite well with the idea of opportunity. Scarcity in the early years of independence also aligned with the need to allocate scarce resources in the most efficient manner possible. Social mobility, that sense of being able to progress individually as well as a nation, was also compatible with this idea of competitiveness. And then especially towards the 80s and 90s, the notion that an upgraded economy would rely on talent, right, was also compatible with the meritocratic notion of reward. And in that paper, I also aligned these developmental precepts and components of meritocracy with particular institutions that you would readily find in Singapore. The idea of multiracialism as a kind of pluralist construct rather than a national integrationist construct. Individual responsibility and a minimal welfare state, which at the time was designed in order to minimize what were thought to be negative or perverse incentives, but also to reduce the burden on national finances or the burden on future generations. So that was the thinking at the time. Right? Also an education system that would allow for the best use of human resources, that it would give everyone a chance. It would stream people into different areas where they could excel and contribute. And an education system that eventually was assessed internationally to be of high quality. And then a system of public sector scholarships, prestigious scholarships, which would identify the most able students, send them off to top universities overseas, bring them back and give them career opportunities in the public sector, where they would excel in fast track opportunities. And Singapore would benefit from these scholarships. And then finally, salaries. Since the mid-1990s, the idea that you had to pay really high private sector-like salaries to your public service leaders and political leaders in order to be able to attract the most talented Singaporeans into an area that does not necessarily enjoy prestige, the public sector. So all these things sort of work together very neatly and very effectively. And I sort of suggested in that paper that it was probably one of the factors that led to Singapore's success, well-documented success. And one of the reasons for that was that it was able to pragmatically deal with features that you would find naturally, or that you would more naturally be able to align with the ideological left, with those features that you would be able to align more naturally with the ideological right. So this is some kind of productive pragmatism in this constellation of institutions, values, and components of a very baggy concept. But I argued in that paper also that from the 90s onwards, Singapore started to embrace the precepts of neoliberal globalization a lot more tightly. And as a result of that, we saw the meritocratic concept itself from a baggy concept tighten up and shift to the right. So we began to pay less attention, I think, to the more egalitarian components on the left of the spectrum. And we started to pay a lot more attention to the components on the right, things like rewarding success, the importance of competitiveness, and paying attention to the elite, cultivating an elite. And by doing that, you generate wealth, success that would trickle down to the rest. And so the thinking started to shift in that direction. And there was a lot more tolerance, I think, of inequality and poverty as a result of that. So I argued in that paper that what historically might have begun as a meritocratic principle of governance turned very profoundly into elitism from the 1990s onwards. So it was a narrative of degeneration. But the weakness of that paper, I think, was that I didn't clearly enough identify the different types of criticisms of meritocracy. And since that time, there's been a lot more work done on Singapore's meritocracy, so a lot more criticism of meritocracy. And so what I'd like to do, I think, is to try and disentangle all these different criticisms and to better understand what people might mean when they criticize meritocracy. What specifically do they not like about it? And it seems to me that one way to do this might be to use an analogy of the machine, right? So if meritocracy were like a machine, then one set of criticisms might involve thinking of the machine as an acceptable thing, maybe even a good thing, but that certain parts in this machine may be harmful. They may be defective, objectionable. And then if you think that way, then one solution might be to replace some of these parts or to remove some of these parts, but meritocracy itself is still a worthy system to embrace. A second type of criticism may also accept the machine, find the machine desirable, but consider that different parts of this machine may not work together so well. They may be incompatible. So the machine might work on the whole, but after a while, the different parts will start to jam into each other, and which leads to malfunction, right? So there's a certain kind of incompatibility. The third type of criticism looks at the design of the machine and says, this is a well-designed machine, right? On paper, it looks terrific, perfect, in fact. But the moment you switch it on, it doesn't work, right? So it works in theory, but the practice just doesn't deliver the kinds of results that you expect. The fourth type of criticism looks at this machine, this meritocratic machine, as producing outputs that give you pleasure, give you sort of fantasies and visions of enjoyment and success and all of that. But actually, these are fantasies that obscure the problems in the machine itself. So, you could think of this as a fantasy-producing machine, right? And the fifth type of criticism looks at the machine as something that worked well for a long time and now is not working as well as it did before. It may even collapse, right, at some point. So the first type of criticism is that there are objectionable parts in meritocracy. The second says that there are internal contradictions in meritocracy. The third says that meritocracy, the practice of meritocracy doesn't live up to the theory. The fourth thinks of meritocracy as an ideology that disguises its internal contradictions, its exploitations, and its injustices. And the fifth, and the one that I'm most interested in for this book that I'm going to write, is meritocracy as a narrative of degeneration or narrative of decay.